So, a new expansion is upon us, and I thought I would try something new. I'm going to review the cards in Avacyn Restored, and try to pick out the ones which will have the greatest impact on Commander. I don't pretend to be the best Commander player on the planet, but I do like to speculate. And keep in mind that this is just speculation. As of the time of this recording, the set has only just been spoiled, and I haven't actually played with any of the cards yet. So if you're watching this video in some far-off future where Revenge of the Hunted and Wild Defiance have turned out to be the best Commander cards in the set, and you can't believe I overlooked their implications for Voltron Riku, I hope you'll have some sympathy. This is all purely guesswork, influenced by my own preferences and experience. The review will be split into two parts. First, I'll talk about the new legendary creatures in the set, and discuss their potential as commanders, and next, I'll review the cards as main deck options. I'll give my list of the top 10 commander cards in the set, as well as many honorable mentions. So I hope you'll enjoy this review, and I hope you can add your own discussions to the comments below. I have no problem with people disagreeing with me, and something tells me there'll be a lot of that. So first, I want to look at the 5 new legendary creatures in the set, and look at how they might do as commanders. I'll start with the title character. Avacyn is a big, expensive, mono-white creature with a pretty devastating ability. The fact that she's mono-white instantly cripples her chances of seeing much play as a commander. Mono-colored legends are a dime a dozen, and Avacyn doesn't really do anything special enough to encourage a deck built around her. 8 mana is a lot to pay for a commander that doesn't win the game on the spot. She might see a bit of play in a fun theme deck, but otherwise I don't think she'll be very popular as a commander. Next is Griselbrand. Similar to Avacyn, he is a big, expensive, mono-black creature with a strong ability. However, in my experience, mono-black is a bit more popular than mono-white. The Cabal Coffer's Good Stuff control deck is very strong, and has never been committed to any one commander in particular. Griselbrand could easily command that deck. He too costs 8 mana, but he does win the game on the spot. It's pretty hard to draw 21 cards and lose, especially if you build a deck which is designed to withstand the life loss. The fact that he is also a 3-turn clock is just gravy, but you'll probably find quicker win conditions with your hand of 21 cards. Griselbrand's main drawback is that you can expect him to draw a lot of hate. He's not exactly subtle, and people will want to make sure that you won't have any life left to spend on cards by the time you cast him. Maybe you're better off with a more unassuming commander, and then just tutor for him when you have the mana later. Now we get to the multicolored angels. These are the ones which were clearly designed to pander to commander players. Woohoo, they're thinking about us. But naturally, as multicolored legends, these angels are a rare breed, and thus will be popular as commanders. We'll start with Sigarda, Host of Herons. Sigarda was clearly designed as a Voltron commander. She already has 2 of the required pillars of Voltron built in: evasion and resiliency. All that she's missing is power. 5/5 isn't going to be enough to take down a whole table. Luckily, beefing her up isn't hard to do. Hexproof is a good start, but I don't find the sacrifice protection to be that big a deal. She stops Eldrazi and a few popular cards like Barter and Blood, but otherwise, it really doesn't matter. She is still easily stopped by counter magic and sweepers, and then you have to pay 7 mana on your Voltron general, who still has a lot of work to do. If I sound bored or unimpressed with Sigarda, that's because I am. I prefer Voltron generals which are cheap to cast, so that I can easily recast them once they're killed. Or I want my Voltron commander to have a built-in power boosting ability. It's not that I don't think Sigarda is bad, it's just that I don't think she's very interesting at all. Next is Bruna, Light of Alabaster. And to say that Bruna will be the most popular commander to come out of Avacyn Restored would be an understatement. Despite the fact that white-blue is a friendly color combination with lots of diehard fans, there hasn't really been a flagship commander which all of the white-blue players gravitate towards. Until now, that is. Bruna is another Voltron commander, but of a different sort. Your goal with Bruna won't be to cast her as soon as possible, but to bide your time and wait until you've assembled the perfect hand of auras, and then cast her. Preferably with 2 blue mana open for protection. And if someone does manage to kill her, all those auras sit comfortably in your graveyard, waiting to be returned to play. Bruna's biggest drawback is the lack of haste. She needs to attack to activate her ability, and you can't afford to wait a whole turn for that. Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, and Hall of the Bandit Lord will all be crucial for her. Aside from that, the battle plan should be quite straightforward. control the board like any good white-blue deck should, sculpt your hand, and, when you're ready, cast Bruna and smash some faces. There aren't too many ways to stop her, so I expect a lot of frustrated opponents. Lastly, we have Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight. Currently, all of the white-red commanders inspire aggro decks, and that doesn't look like it's changing anytime soon. Unlike the other two multicolored angels in this set, Gisela doesn't seem to be a Voltron commander, although with her ability to double damage, it's not hard to see her picking up a couple swords and one-shotting people. Yeah, damage doubling is good in Commander. In a format where life totals are high and equipments are popular, Furnace of Wrath goes a long way. It should be noted that her ability does more than give your creatures pseudo-double strike. It doubles all damage your opponents receive. That means that Price of Progress, Acidic Soil, and Earthquake work overtime as well. It also means that opponents' creatures deal double damage when attacking each other, too. Similar to Edric, Gisela encourages your opponents to attack each other, although the smart ones won't fall into that trap. She does cost 7 mana, which means her main drawback as a commander is getting her out. But she really only needs to be on the battlefield for one turn to kill a player. Once again, haste will be crucial, so that Gisela can add her own 10 first strike and commander damage to your assault. I didn't even mention her second ability, but it's obviously worth noting. It means that, as long as Gisela is in play, you're clearly not on the defensive. Gisela will be a popular commander. I personally have a soft spot for aggro decks, and she's about as much raw power as you can pack into one creature. Next, I'll look at the rest of the set. I've created a list of what I consider to be the top 10 cards in Avacyn Restored to impact Commander. In addition, I'll offer 25 honorable mentions. These honorable mentions will be cards which I still think are good, but not great enough for the top 10. It will also be cards which I don't necessarily think are good, but which are generating a lot of discussion amongst the player base. Avacyn Restored is an amazing set for Commander, and if I could, I would have worked another 10 or 20 cards into the discussion, but I had to narrow it down to keep this video somewhat short. So forgive me if I left off your favorite new card, and feel free to mention it in the comments below. So the first honorable mention goes to Avacyn, Angel of Hope. Okay, so you're probably wondering how I can give the title character just an honorable mention, but to be honest, I don't think she's that special. Giant Pillow Fort Angels are nothing new for white. They all do roughly the same thing. Help to fortify your board position without necessarily working to weaken the opponents. This one is actually pretty easy to deal with. Many of the best spot removal spells have no trouble getting rid of indestructible creatures. I guess the best way to use her is to follow her up with a Planar Cleansing or Armageddon, but you might have to wait a whole turn before pulling that trick off, because it's unlikely any of your opponents will do it for you. Avacyn is good, but I don't think she should take the spot of Iona, another Pillow Fort Angel who protects your board in a different way while aggressively hindering your opponent's progress. But make no mistake, Avacyn is solid, and, as the new flavor of the month, she'll likely see a lot of play. The next honorable mention goes to Banishing Stroke. But first I want to talk for a second about Miracle, one of the new keyword abilities from Avacyn Restored. Miracle lets you exchange timing for a cheaper mana cost, which seems reasonable at first, but the problem is that it's unlikely to actually trigger very often purely by chance. And even when you do pull a Miracle on your draw step, you might not necessarily want to cast it at that time. So what you're left with is just an overcosted card. But Miracle isn't completely useless. There are ways to fix your draws so that you're guaranteed to get the Miracle when you want it. The most obvious way to do this is with Sensei's Divining Top. Top is good with Miracle for a couple of reasons. First, you can sort your draws so that you hit the Miracle when you want it, and second, you can use the Top's second ability to draw the Miracle spell during your opponent's turn whenever you want. And because it's your opponent's turn, it's probably going to be the first spell you've drawn that turn. So Top lets you flash in these Miracle spells whenever you like. And that seems like sort of a gimmicky application for Miracle, but because Top belongs in pretty much every deck, it's pretty relevant. So Miracle isn't totally useless, but it's a relatively minor bonus. I think you really need to focus on the main casting cost of these Miracle cards to evaluate them properly. So getting back to Banishing Stroke, White has never had any shortage for creature, enchantment, or artifact spot removal, but it's not very often that it gets one card that can deal with any of those things. So, Banishing Stroke stands out because of its versatility, but also the fact that it can tuck things. And as we know, tuck is very good in Commander. A comparable card is Oblation, which can also hit any type of permanent and tuck for half the mana cost. In my opinion, 6 mana is just too much to pay for spot removal. I want my spot removal to be cheap and reliable, so that I can cast it with my leftover mana that I want to leave open during my opponent's turns. For 6 mana, I'm hoping to get, a sweeper, not a single target spot removal. So Banishing Stroke isn't bad, but Oblation should probably make the cut before this card does. Cathar's Crusade is the next card I want to talk about. And this is a card which will probably be overlooked in most other formats due to its casting cost, but I think it will be an MVP in Commander token decks, which are represented by several different generals. Think about this card with any token generator. Spectral Procession, for example, will pump out 3 4/4 flying tokens, which also give all of your other creatures 3+1/+1 counters for good measure. And that's just one crappy example. There are some much better token generators which will do absolutely ridiculous things with this card in play. I don't even think I need to mention what would happen if you have Doubling Season out as well. So in summary, this card packs a serious amount of punch for only 5 mana, but I don't see it getting played much outside of token decks. The next honorable mention goes to Silverblade Paladin. Double Strike is a really good ability in Commander, because it's one of the few aggressive abilities which actually scales well with the higher life totals. Creatures are bigger and equipments are popular, so giving Double Strike to something can be huge, especially in Voltron. Previously, it took at least 5 mana to give a creature Double Strike, and Fire Shrieker was only barely playable in some Voltron decks. Now you can give your general Double Strike for only 3 mana, and the lack of a equip cost, so to speak, is huge, since tempo is really important for getting your commander suited up after having to recast him. As a creature, Silverblade Paladin is a little more vulnerable than an equipment, but he also provides a 2/2 double striking body, which is great in a deck already full of tons of equipments. Voltron decks need a plan B, and this guy can pair with anything to become a huge threat with equipments and your second double striking creature. So this thing will definitely see a bit of play in Voltron decks. Stolen Goods is a fun new card, and it's actually not that bad, as a good portion of the time it will end up being ahead of the curve at 4 mana. The problem is that it's wildly unpredictable, so you can only really play this as a for fun card, which will occasionally blow out the entire game. So I wouldn't really play this over, say, Bribery, for example, which will actually let you pick and choose what to steal from your opponents, but at least Stolen Goods gives us a new hilarious use for Hinder. Next I'm going to talk about Tamiyo the Moonsage. Planeswalkers are generally pretty weak in Commander. They're so easy to attack, really hard to protect against 3 opponents, and tend to draw a bit more hate than they're actually worth. So they really need to be good if they're going to be worth a spot in your deck. Her first ability is pretty standard. Most Planeswalkers have some way to protect themselves, and this one works very well, taking the worst attacker out of the equation. Her second ability looks really good at first glance, but it's a bit paradoxical. If you're targeting yourself with the ability, it means you've tapped down your blockers and you've left up nothing to defend her with. If you're targeting an opponent who has a large army of tapped creatures, then chances are their army is too big to defend against. That's probably a bit overgeneralized, and I'm sure there's a profitable way to use her second ability without risking Tamiyo, but it's going to be a bit trickier than you think, in my opinion. Perhaps the best way to use her is just suicide her second ability and get as many cards out of her as possible before she inevitably dies. I will talk about her ultimate a bit. It's obviously very good, and will probably win you the game when you pull it off. Most people will say, oh, whatever, any Planeswalker ultimate should win a game, but that's not actually the case. Most Planeswalker ultimates only, beat one player, or they fall victim to a Wrath effect or spot removal, whereas this one is pretty reliable, giving you an emblem that they can't deal with, which will probably lead to a eventual win. So I don't think I would play Tamiyo in any decks, but she's obviously very fun, and if you can protect her, building up to her ultimate is probably a pretty good way to use her. Next up is Dark Imposter. This card is understandably a fan favorite, as it obviously has some cool abilities. I'm not sure how great it is though. 6 mana is a lot to pay to kill a creature, even if it is repeatable. There have been lots of other creatures with repeatable creature removal, and some of them are a bit more efficient than this one. So the only thing that sets this thing apart is the second ability, but sadly I'm not sure how great it is. Most creatures don't have activated abilities, or they might require mana costs that you can't pay. I'm giving this card hope just because it's in the same color as Cabal Coffers, and Mountains of Mana will give you the opportunity to activate that ability several times in one turn, which definitely puts this card over the top. Exquisite Blood is one of my favorite cards in this set. Obviously this is a card which scales well into multiplayer, but there's always been a sort of life gain is bad stigma in EDH. It's true that bad life gain is bad, but good life gain is very good. In my experience, most games are still won and lost with damage, so keeping yourself at a healthy life total is important. I would put this in a deck which plans to cause a lot of damage to several players at once, not just any old black deck. Maybe a deck built around Megrim or Earthquake effects will get a lot of mileage out of this one. Cards like Pestilence, Exsanguinate, and Soren Markov only get better with this thing out. I should also mention that it has an instant win combo with Sanguine Bond, but it's not like black has any shortage of instant win combos. The problem with this card is that it encourages players to attack you rather than each other. Sig River Cutthroat sort of does the same thing. I realize this card is not as great as I'm building it up to be, but it will definitely appeal to a few twisted theme deck players like myself. I look forward to getting some play out of this one. The next honorable mention is Bonfire of the Damned, yet another miracle card. This Earthquake is a really good card in EDH, because you can use it to remove threats in the early game, sweep the board in the mid-game, and finish off opponents in the late game. Most Earthquake variants do something similar, and are welcome cards in any red deck as well. Bonfire of the Damned is a little disappointing though, simply because its casting cost is just too brutal. I find that a lot of the time, I cast Earthquake in the first few turns to get rid of a problem general. Earthquake is versatile like that, but Bonfire requires 5 mana to kill a 2-2, and by then it's probably too late. The fact that you avoid hurting your own creatures is of course a big plus, but it's kind of a drawback that you can only use this to hurt one player and his board at a time. Sure, Earthquake could hurt you, but as the caster, you have control over when it comes down, so you can minimize the amount of damage it does to you, and make sure it only comes down when it's advantageous to do so. The fact that Bonfire hits flyers is of course a big plus that most Earthquake variants don't have. I did a lot of trash talking for this card, but let me assure you that it's going to be half decent. The miracle cost is a minor bonus that I didn't mention, but it is there. Just don't forget that you have many alternatives. Mad Prophet is next. This is one of several cards in the set which herald the transfer of looting to red, which is highly promising for red fans in Commander. While red's drawing capabilities still don't hold a candle to blue, black, or greens, this card is certainly a start. But don't get too caught up in the hype. Mad Prophet certainly brings some of the drawing power that red desperately needs, but old colorless standbys might still be better. Crystal Ball is a fair comparison. It has a mana cost to activate, but it digs one card deeper, and there are a lot more options with Scry 2 than with discard first looting. Of course, there are some situations where the Prophet may be better. Most of the time, I think I'd rather take Crystal Ball and the many other artifact draw fixers. But whether or not I end up giving Mad Prophet a try, I'm at least hopeful that it's a signal of good things to come for red card draw. Rite of Ruin is a card which sort of flew under the radar during spoiler season. If you play a lot of white, you'll know why Austere Command and Catastrophe are two of the best sweepers in the format. Selectivity. You can always select the modes which are most devastating to your opponents while leaving you with your best cards. So Rite of Ruin is red's Austere Command, but not quite. The problem is that there is no 0 on the card, so you're going to have a hard time keeping your best cards alive. It's also a pretty big deal that this costs 7 rather than 6, which is the standard cost for board sweepers. While the selectivity is nice, reliability is the most important thing of all, and Rite of Ruin is lacking in that. It's not a proper sweeper. But it's hard to evaluate this card on paper. The thing might be a lot stronger than I think. It's definitely worth a try. Tybalt the Fiend-Blooded is another Planeswalker, meaning he's already started off on the wrong foot in a multiplayer format. But wait, he brings red some of that precious card draw, so just how good is it? Well, the random discard definitely hurts, but it's still better than nothing. His second ability is half decent, as it will frequently be an easy 6 or 7 to the face in Commander. His ultimate is, again, paradoxical. If the opponents control enough creatures that it's actually worth using his ability, chances are they would have never let Tybalt get up to 6 loyalty in the first place. He comes with no built-in protection, so you have to dedicate resources to keeping him alive. Now you have to wonder if that card draw ability is really worth it. He'll work out pretty well if you get him down on turn 2, but you definitely can't rely on that. As an aside, this is a good opportunity to bring up Dangerous Wager, a card which I refuse to even designate as an honorable mention. Trust me people, I am excited about red card draw too, but I don't think red decks are so starved for draw that it needs to resort to cards like Dangerous Wager. Sure, it's a straight draw too if your hand is empty, but if your red deck is dumping cards so fast that it can consistently cast Dangerous Wager for its maximum card advantage, you're doing something wrong. There are other ways to conserve gas and generate card advantage in mono red. You don't see black decks running Phyrexian Tribute, so why should red decks resort to this? I won't fault someone for trying out Mad Prophet or Tybalt, since those can actually be decent, but please don't run Dangerous Wager. The next honorable mention goes to Tyrant of Discord. Big creatures with big abilities are always welcome in big red decks, but this one is a little lousy. Most of the time it will hit a land and that will be it. Then you're left with an underwhelming vanilla 7/7 for 7. Plus it can be kind of a logistical nightmare when someone has 15 land, 12 plant tokens, and a variety of other random permanents. If you're actually planning to use this card with sincere intentions, consider Capricious Efreet instead, which has the same flavor with a more practical approach. Zealous Conscripts has gotten a lot of attention. Red often gets temporary steal effects, but targeting any permanent is a somewhat rare variant. I'm not sure how relevant it is, though. Sure, the theory is that you can swipe a Planeswalker and pop its ultimate, but most of the time, the best target is probably just going to be a creature. I guess you might occasionally steal a tapped Strip Mine, or eliminate a pesky Solitary Confinement for one turn, but those are corner cases. I would rather just run Conquering Manticore, which for just one more mana gives us a far more relevant body. Of course, Zealous Conscript's most important feature is that it goes infinite with Kiki-Jiki, giving red a fairly reliable instant win combo. Not that I think Kiki-Jiki combos are fresh or original, but it's nice that red can finally do it without the help of white or blue. The first of many green honorable mentions is Craterhoof Behemoth. This is yet another card which was built for token decks. Green now has an overwhelming Stampede, which it can search for with Tooth and Nail or Eladermi's Call. It looks like Reefs the Redeemed quietly got some real gems in this set. Craterhoof Behemoth probably doesn't have any applications outside of token decks, as it's pretty lousy on a board with few creatures. Primal Surge is an interesting card. You could design a deck around it so that it will instantly win whenever you cast it, but unless the deck is specifically built for it, it's pretty weak. I hate unreliable cards, and Primal Surge becomes too unreliable even if you've got just a few non-permanents in the deck. So if you've got the deck for it, have fun. Otherwise, you should probably just stick with Genesis Wave. Rain of Thorns is quite a beating. Green doesn't often get this much card advantage on a sorcery. It reminds me a lot of Return to Dust in white, which is obviously a staple, but the difference is that Rain of Thorns has a lot more powerful competition in green. Relic Crush comes pretty close to this, and sees only a little bit of play itself. Hull Breach does most of what this card does for a third of the mana cost, albeit requiring a second color. And of course nothing comes close to the all-powerful Terastodon. In green, I want my utility removal spells to be cheap, or come attached to a big creature. But Rain of Thorns might just be good enough to make the cut. 3 for 1 is huge, especially if you can nail 3 relevant targets. Just be prepared to be frustrated when you can't hit Soul Rings or Necropotences before it's too late. The next honorable mention goes to one of the most unassuming yet intriguing cards in this set, Somberwald Sage. Mana dorks are usually overlooked in EDH. You want your ramp to be enduring, so that the advantage lasts until the end of the game. Creatures tend to die fast and often. But Somberwald Sage may have enough power to be worth the risk. No other mana dork has provided such a huge boost with so few strings attached. It can only hit creatures. Most of the time, your goal is to ramp into a big fatty anyways. Giving you 7 mana on turn 4 is pretty insane, but it is of course fragile. You have to decide if it's worth running this over, say, Cultivate. Cultivate only ramps you by 1, but it ensures a land drop down the road and retains that bonus throughout the game, barring an Armageddon. Like I said, Somberwald Sage is intriguing. It packs so much power into that frail body, so it's not hard to imagine it could be heavily abused in the right deck. You might be surprised to see Soul of the Harvest as an honorable mention, because it seems to have EDH staple written all over it. And yes, it was hard cutting this card from my top 10, but really this card is just a slightly improved Primordial Sage. And although that card is certainly strong, it really doesn't see much play outside of the specialized machine gun creature decks like Animire, Azuri, or Momer Vig. The added beef and trample on Soul of the Harvest might intrigue Stonebrow players, and the slightly adjusted trigger might interest Mael, so we can certainly expect to see a lot of this card, but it doesn't really do anything much different from the Sage. Ulvenwald Tracker is one of the coolest cards in this set. I'll admit I didn't give it a second look on my first pass through the spoiled cards. Just another gimmicky ability which requires too much setup, right? But wait, this ability translates into tap, destroy a target creature surprisingly often. All you need is a decent-sized creature on the board, which green can supply fairly reliably. So not only do we have creature kill in green, but it's repeatable creature kill. So yeah, I would say this card shows an amazing amount of promise. It's hard to evaluate on paper, but I'm definitely going to give this a try in one of my Stompy decks. I have to say, I'm glad they didn't stick this ability on some dumb 5/5 for 7, but I kind of wish he had a slightly bigger frame. Even if he were just a 2/1, he could single-handedly kill off problem generals like Arkham Dags and Enjoyra, but I guess that's wishful thinking. Let's just be happy with what we've got. Wolfir Silverheart hasn't gotten a whole lot of attention, and I guess it's easy to overlook a vanilla fatty, but I'm excited for this card because it's the kind of design we need to make aggro decks become more viable in a 40-life format. This card provides 12 power for 5 mana, which is pretty unprecedented. Of course it lacks evasion, haste, and protection that reliable beaters want in EDH, but it makes up for it in raw power. I'm hoping that cards like this, and the many other green honorable mentions, will bring about a proper green stompy deck in EDH. The next honorable mention is for Conjurer's Closet, and I'm going to go ahead and extend this honorable mention to the whole suite of flicker effects that have been printed in this set. Creatures with come into play abilities are popular due to their potential to be reused. Flicker effects give you a way to reuse those abilities, and also provide other bonuses, such as protection from spot removal. I'm glad they settled on the version of this mechanic where the creature returns to the battlefield immediately. That means that cards like Draining Whelk and Venser are going to be more abusable than ever. I guess I was making a mistake when I retired my Rasputin Dreamweaver Blink deck, because that archetype obviously got a ton of new toys in this set. Vessel of Endless Rest is neat because it allows you to run a graveyard hate spell without devoting a whole deck slot to it. This is the same reason that Pajuka Bog is so good. Every deck needs a way to exile recurable threats, but nobody likes making room for a Relic of Progenitus. Cards like Vessel of Endless Rest give you access to graveyard hate and a mana rock slot. Unfortunately, this card is a bit weak on all fronts. It only exiles one card, which is kind of limited, and as a 3 casting cost mana rock, it's quite inferior to Coalition Relic and Worn Power Stone. Desolate Lighthouse is a pretty solid addition to the spell land cycle. Its ability will always be relevant. The question you need to ask yourself is whether it will be relevant enough. It's tempting to stuff your deck with utility lands like this, but remember that you only have room for so many colorless lands before you start hurting your mana base. Consider that running a card like Desolate Lighthouse means you need to cut one of your other colorless utility lands. It depends on what sort of blue-red deck you're playing. It's possible you get more mileage out of a Riptide Laboratory at high market, depending on your deck's needs. You might find that you just don't have room for a card like this. 4 mana for its ability is pretty fair, but really a blue-red deck will often have better uses for its mana anyways. But I won't deny that looting on a land is pretty excellent, so I'll recommend you try Cephalid Coliseum, which comfortably replaces an island without hurting your mana base at all. Another excellent spell land is Slayer's Stronghold. Haste is absolutely crucial in EDH decks, so it's pretty fantastic when we can give it to our creatures in a land slot. But I should be clear here. Slayer's Stronghold is nowhere near as good as Hall of the Bandit Lord. Haste helps our creatures attack sooner than they otherwise would have, and that means not waiting 3 more turns to have mana up to activate this land. So it definitely doesn't help with curving out hasty threats, but if you have an abundance of mana, then the Stronghold will obviously shine. Unlike Hall of the Bandit Lord, Slayer's Stronghold continues to power up your creatures after they have lost the summoning sickness. +2/+0 and Vigilance is handy bonus which will quickly add up. But once again, it's overshadowed by the extremely powerful Sunhome, Fortress of the Legion. But I have to be fair here. Although Slayer's Stronghold doesn't outshine either the Hall or Sunhome, it does provide a versatile third option in Red-White's powerful arsenal of aggro lands. Run this in your Red-White aggro deck if you can spare the slot. So that's the last of the honorable mentions. Next we'll get into the top 10 cards which I think will impact Commander. Hopefully you're as excited as I am. At the number 10 slot I have Devastation Tide. Now if you ever played Standard during the days of Upheaval, you'll know why Bounce Everything is a powerful effect. But Upheaval is banned in EDH for good reason, and Devastation Tide is obviously not quite the same, but it still serves a similar purpose. It allows the slow control deck a chance to reset the board state, undoing all the tempo that the faster decks accumulated in the early game. It also gives the blue player a way to deal with permanents, sending them back to their owner's hands where they become vulnerable to counter magic. This card could fit into just about any blue deck as a utility spell, but I would especially consider it in any deck which tends to sit back for the first several turns sculpting a powerful hand. Those are the decks which are most likely to benefit from a soft reset like this one. At number 9, I have Malignus. This is probably the riskiest card I have in my top 10, because I'm pretty sure this card didn't get too many serious looks during spoiler season. After all, it is just a big dumb vanilla creature. The last time we saw a big dumb vanilla creature in Lord of Extinction, it was overhyped before eventually seeing little to no serious play in EDH. After all, the really good aggressive creatures have haste, or evasion, or some other utility. So why do I think Malignus is different? Well, it was obviously built for multiplayer. It doesn't always shrink when it hits someone, unlike in 1v1. And I think Red has the tools to make this card a real threat. Any damage doubler means Malignus can one-shot someone, and any Earthquake effect clears away pesky chump blockers. Malignus obviously benefits greatly from haste, so as to catch defenders off guard, and Red can obviously provide that. So maybe I'm being optimistic, thinking that Malignus won't go the way of Lord of Extinction, but whether or not he becomes an EDH favorite, I certainly plan to smash a few faces with him in my Urabrask deck. Number 8 is Terminus. Now, I'm not crazy about sweepers which hit only creatures when there are so many other versatile options available, but Tuck is obviously a very powerful ability. And Terminus might benefit from Miracle more than any other spell, so there's no way we can deny that this is a powerful spell. The main reason I'm not ranking it higher is that we've already got a card which does the same thing for less mana. So the biggest impact Terminus will have on the format is redundancy. Does your deck want 2 Hallowed Burials? Because now you can do that. The question is whether you would actually prefer 2 Tuck Wraths over Austere Command or Chroma's Vengeance. Of course, it depends on how many sweepers you tend to run, but in my opinion, there are plenty of similar cards I'll run before reaching for Terminus. But this card will see play. Its effect is huge, and not everyone owns a Hallowed Burial. I'm probably just bitter because I don't like Tuck. In 7th, I have Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight. Now, I've already talked about her as a general, so you know why her abilities are good, and I don't need to repeat those reasons. But because you don't necessarily need to build around her to make her good, she can be a very powerful addition to the main deck for any red-white aggressive deck. Brian, Stoutarm, and Jor Kadeen tend to love huge amounts of damage and swarms of creatures. Kalia and Mael both get around her tricky mana cost. Unfortunately, she does die to most removal without leaving any lasting benefit. Her lack of resiliency and lack of instant returns mean that your 7 mana investment is easily neutralized. But if you can catch your opponents off guard, and they happen to not have an answer to her at the right time, she can quickly eliminate players. You can never have too many threats which demand answers. The 6th spot goes to one of the neatest utility creatures we've seen in a while, Deadeye Navigator. This creature provides the most efficient and reusable blink effect we have ever seen, and it's highly abusable. Consider this card with any creature with an Enters the Battlefield ability. With Muldrifter, you have repeatable draw 2 for 2. With Acidic Slime, you start blowing up people's stuff without remorse, and you can do much worse things with bombing your creatures. Abusing Enters the Battlefield abilities is just one thing this guy can do. His ability also provides pseudo-hexproof for all of your creatures. While he's out, you can activate his ability to dodge all spot removal. He also lets you remove your creatures from combat without taking damage, so you're safe on that front too. I guess the one thing you're maybe still susceptible to is sweepers, but I mean, you're playing blue, right? Seriously, this creature does so much. Blue has had its fair share of big stupid bombs in the past, but not many of them have interacted with the board quite as dominantly as this guy does, since maybe Tidespout Tyrant. The main reason I didn't rank him higher is that he unfortunately does next to nothing on his own. He always requires at least one other creature out, and he's kind of a sitting duck without his soulbound ability active, but I don't think that'll matter too much. He doesn't need to be built around to become good. Enters the Battlefield creatures are amazing in all decks. He should slot right into any creature-based deck and do some pretty stupid things. Getting into the top 5, we have Harvester of Souls. So wait, why am I ranking this thing so much higher than its green counterpart? After all, Harvester of Souls is competing with some pretty busted card draw in black. Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, it doesn't cost much mana to put creatures into your graveyard, so you can get instant returns from this guy. Second, His ability counts creatures sent to your opponent's graveyards too, so you'll gain some incidental benefits from opponent's creatures dying, but ideally you're the one who's causing them to die in the first place. I don't think he has enough going on to slide on into any old black deck on his own, but most black creature-based decks are already ready-made for him. This guy is really good. In fourth, I've got the last spell land in the cycle. Alchemist's Refuge is so much better than it looks. It solves the conundrum that has bothered blue-green decks for a really long time. I want to tap out for my creatures, but what if I need to counter something? Refuge removes this conflict, allowing you to keep counter magic up without holding back on the creatures. That's a pretty big thing, but this land does a lot more than that. You can flash in instant speed blockers, or just bluff them. You can ensure that your bomb won't fall victim to sorcery speed sweepers. You could even write a replication on Avenger of Zendikar in response to a Decree of Pain. Of course, there's the issue that you need 3 extra mana in order to cast any spell with flash, but this land is clearly a control land, and control decks usually don't rely on tempo as heavily as other decks. Plus you're in green, so it's not hard to ramp up to where the extra cost is hardly noticeable. I've always liked Vidalcan Orrery, but have had trouble finding a spot for it in decks. Now blue-green decks can run it in a land slot, an uncounterable, mana-producing, difficult-to-remove land slot. I have a feeling this will become one of those lands that can quietly dominate a game from the sidelines if left unchecked. I know I don't look forward to playing against control decks that can leave mana open for counters without forfeiting a chance to drop threats, but I definitely consider this one of the best cards in the set. The third place card is another land, Cavern of Souls. This land caused a bit of a stir when it was spoiled. Is it really fun card design to shut down an entire mechanic with a land card that has hardly any drawback at all? Maybe not, but I think this card will be good for the format. I love my counter spells, but I also love parity, and blue's dominance over stack interaction has been one of the main reasons that it overshadows the other colors. Weakening counter magic will give non-blue decks a chance to fight back. One notable side effect of this card is that it significantly weakens blue's tuck. Just name your general's creature type to take Hinder and Spell Crumple out of the mix. It's always been smart to run stuff like High Market and decks which rely heavily on the commander to protect them from tuck spells like Hallowed Burial and Condemn, but it's kind of unfair that so few decks have an answer to Hinder. This card is a great way to defend against it. All discussions about whether this card is fair, fun, interactive, or well designed are pointless, because it's in print and that's that. What matters is whether you should play it. I would say this is a key card in any deck which depends on resolving the general. Voltron decks and build-around decks especially. Tribal decks can also greatly benefit, as it will provide a bit of mana fixing on top of protecting your creatures from counterspells. Outside of decks like these, it's unlikely to be worth the slot. You may have a few key creatures that you want to slip past counter magic, but it probably won't be worth running a colorless land if it only benefits a handful of spells in your deck. But this card will see significant play in Commander, there's no question about that. So if you red draw players were discouraged by my assessment of red's card draw spells in this set, you'll be happy to see that I have Reforged the Soul in second. Many people will agree that Wheel of Fortune is the overall strongest red card in Commander. It has incredible card draw power in a color which desperately lacks it. And now red has a second wheel. Well, third if you count Wheel of Fate, but I personally don't count Wheel of Fate because that card's pretty lousy. The key to maximizing the payoff of a Wheel of Fortune is timing. You want to cast it at a time which maximizes the benefit to you without giving your opponents too much. Suspending a Wheel of Fate for 4 turns gives the other players plenty of time to prepare for it and cash in. But getting back to Reforge the Soul. This card is a no-strings-attached wheel for only 2 mana more. The extra mana is not insignificant, because it may prevent me from doing much with my new hand, but I'll still happily pay for it. The Miracle could be great if it lets you cast this at end of turn via Sensei's Divining Top, but I could easily see myself forgoing the Miracle when I top deck this on my turn, because, as I said, Wheel of Fortune is all about timing. I'd say any deck which runs Wheel of Fortune currently should give Reforge the Soul a look. And you probably saw this one coming. The number 1 EDH card in Avacyn Restored is Griselbrand. I talked briefly about his relevance as a commander, but I think he'll do his worst damage from the main deck. Don't be fooled by his heavy black casting cost. Griselbrand will see plenty of play in 2 and 3 color decks, and they won't have any trouble getting him out. But in any case, I'll state the obvious. Paying life for cards in EDH is good. When it's unlimited, it's incredible, and sometimes ban-worthy. I don't want to throw the B word around like it's nothing, because the Rules Committee doesn't ban anything until it's had a chance to prove it deserves it, but the similarities between Griselbrand and Yawgmoth's Bargain are hard to ignore. Griselbrand being a creature is far from a drawback, considering he does all of his damage at instant speed the moment he hits play. Rather, him being a creature makes him easier to tutor for, easier to cheat into play, easier to protect, and easier to recur. Oh, and I guess you get a 7/7 lifelinking demon too, as if that's just icing on the cake. The one thing holding Griselbrand back would be politics. Everyone needs to attack the guy who just drew 21 cards, and if you're the guy paying 21 life for cards, you'd better be prepared to deal with that. But make no mistake, Griselbrand is the real deal. He will single-handedly win games. So there it is, that's my set review. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll add something to the discussion. If you think it was worthwhile, I'll do it again for future sets. Thanks for watching, and have fun playing Commander with the new cards in Avacyn Restored.